Growing up as a kid, we always built model airplanes and you know, the little balsa flying models, and I think we had a gasoline-powered plane one time, so I was always kind of interested in that. But I guess my first airplane ride was when I was at Kansas State University. I got associated with one of my classmates, and we were doing an architectural project that we needed some aerial photos. So he belonged to a flying club in Manhattan, and we went up in a 172. And so I kind of got interested at that time. Didn't pursue it, but was interested. And then when I got out of college and went to work for a firm here in Manhattan, the owner of the firm was a pilot. He had antique airplanes, and I eventually married his daughter, and he became my father-in-law, and he got me more and more interested in flying. Then he made an offer to several of us at the firm at the time to give us pilot lessons if we were interested. So I remember my first lesson, I thought we were just going to taxi around, but we actually took off. So I remember that was quite a thrill. Started soloing, then I started going to project sites as part of my solo flights. So then I started using the plane for travel rather than in business, rather than just going up and getting my time in it. And overall travel expenses, you know, you'd be out and back to the office in the same day versus traveling and spending all day driving or having to stay overnight. So it was kind of a time consideration as far as the business part of it goes. Plus, I just enjoyed getting out and flying across the countryside. It's away from the hustle and bustle of the traffic. You're up there most of the time in a nice clear day. You see lots of countryside, flying across the state, you know, Kansas or Missouri. That's kind of primarily where I fly. And you see a lot of sights from the air, a different perspective. Bought my first airplane, I think it was in 1979. It's a little Aeronca Chief. It was a 1946 model. And I had that for a few years, and that was fun. I was satisfied with that. But one day my father-in-law said, well, would you like to have this Fairchild? Would you like to trade? And I said, well, yeah, I've always had my eye on that Fairchild 24. So that was in 1984, I believe. And I've been flying that ever since. I really enjoy the antique airplanes. So I enjoy going to gatherings where the old planes are. Like I said, I had a 46 Chief for a while, and I really enjoyed that. It was slow, but it was fun to get out and hand prop it, and you know, it was a fairly common airplane at these fly-ins, so it didn't grab a lot of attention, but it was fun to fly it in. And then when I got the Fairchild, you know, that really brings a lot of attention, not to myself, but just to the airplane. It's really a unique airplane, and a lot of people are interested in it. So and I get to park on the front row when I fly in that, so. Takes you back to that era of time when it was kind of glamorous to fly. A lot of movie stars and you know, notable individuals owned these planes because they weren't for the common, you know, everyday person back then. They tried to promote that, but still they were expensive. And so anyway, I kind of enjoy thinking back at those times. Well, in my particular plane, in the Fairchild 24, one thing I've always noticed is the way the landing gear is configured. It actually is almost like a flying buttress structural support. The way it's structured and ties into the airplane, it kind of reminds me of some of the old cathedrals, the flying buttresses that they used on those for additional support and to go further heights and make a wider footprint. And the same thing is kind of around the Fairchild, that particular gear. It's a fairly easy plane to fly. It has really well-balanced controls. It has a wide landing gear, so it's stable on landing and takeoff. And it's fairly stable in the air. It's got a big fin on it, which helps in turbulence. It's not a fast airplane. It's probably 105 miles per hour, so I always kind of compare it to maybe 172, but it's not quite as efficient because it has a lot of drag hanging out there, so it might be a little bit slower than 172, and it's a comfortable airplane to fly. It's noisy and it's a little fatiguing, but kind of with the modern headsets these days, you can kind of cut some of that noise out. I think it's important to work on your own plane to a point. I mean, you have your limitations, of course, for safety reasons, but you get to know the plane, what to look for if there's something a little bit unusual, an oil leak or something like that. You can, it's a little more readily noticeable. This particular engine on the Fairchild does not have self-lubricating valves, so every 20-25 hours you kind of have to open it up and put some grease on them. But that gives you a chance to kind of look over the engine and make sure things are tight. I've run across some instances one time where I saw a cable or something that was a little bit loose, and so I could correct it or call it to the attention of my mechanic and determine what was wrong. So I think it's important. I think there's some things you can't do and you shouldn't do if you don't have an A&P license. If a person's interested in getting into antiques or the classical airplanes, I guess I would recommend, first of all, visiting with owners of some of the older planes. Go to some of the fly-ins, talk to them, go to some of the mechanics who work on them and visit with them. And that'll help you determine, if you haven't already, what model you might be interested in. Some of the planes, not like any plane or automobile, some have particular problems or issues that crop up all the time, so you want to be aware of that stuff. And then once you determine what kind of plane you're interested in, maybe you can even have somebody take you a ride or get a little more in depth on that. And some of the models are fairly economical to get into. The little Aranca Chief that I had years ago, I bought it for $5,000. It only cost me like $100 a year to have an annual done. It burned 4 gallons an hour, which at $6 a gallon now, that's a big difference. And it didn't go very fast, but it depends on what you want. If you want a fast airplane or one just to enjoy, just to fly around. So it's just like buying a car. You got to decide what it is you want, what features you want, why you want that model, things of that nature. There seems to be maybe a little more camaraderie, a little more commonality between the owners of the planes. They seem to be more friendly, those that I've been around. Just because of they're all flying the older airplanes and they're interested in the old airplanes. I suppose like going to an antique car show. I mean, it's the same kind of connection, kind of reliving that era of time. To get into flying antiques is probably just like any other hobby. There's all varying degrees of the level of cost that you can enter. But I always like to tell the story. The fellow that used to own this strip where I keep my plane now, Leo Walter, so he didn't have a lot of income. He was a modest individual. However, he owned a J3 Cub. He flew it to fly-ins all over the country. He built a BD-5 airplane. And you wonder, well, how in the world did he do that on that small income? Well, he would save up his money. He would not go out and spend his money on beer and restaurants and frivolous things. Everything in his life was kind of geared around aviation. So if he had to sell some art, he used to collect artifacts, go out and hunt for fossils and stuff. I remember he would gather some of those up and take them and sell them, so he'd have enough money to get some fuel to fly down to Florida or whatever. So I always kind of remind people of that. Here's this individual, he's not wealthy, and yet he flies 2 airplanes and enjoys it every day. I belong to several aviation groups. Some of the national ones, I belong to the AOAPA. I belong to the Antique Airplane Association because I own an antique. I think it's good to stay involved with a group that supports and looks after that part of aviation. I belong to the Experimental Aviation Association, the antique wing of that. Again, they have a lot of support for owners of antiques, for the legal aspect of flying antiques or flying in general. I belong to this local organization called the Flint Hill Flyers. It's It's a chapter of the Antique Airplane Association, a great organization to kind of keep the interest of flying. There are members that don't have planes, but they're interested in aviation and particularly the older planes. There's a lot of support that you can get and a lot of contacts if you're looking for parts or information on your airplane. A lot of people know other people throughout the country, and so there's a benefit there. Well, my wife is probably one of my biggest supporters. She grew up with flying all of her life. Her dad always owned airplanes when they were kids. When it came time to decide to buy the Fairchild, I mean, she was right up there. Yeah, let's get it. So that's been really, really nice. But she'll go to some of the fly-ins with me once in a while. She did take a pinch hitter course years ago that they offered, you know, as a co-pilot, so to speak, so that, you know, if she needed to operate the radios or fly the airplane or something in an emergency, she could. So she kind of went to that extent. My wife always reminds me I'm the kind of person that doesn't really like change. And I think that's probably true. So that's why I've kept the Fairchild for nearly 30 years. I enjoy it. It's a nice airplane to fly. It's a classic looking airplane. It looks great. And it's fun to take to fly-ins and gatherings, and people appreciate it. But I don't know, at times I think, well, it'd be nice to have a faster airplane, one that might be a little better for cross-country, a little more comfortable. But at the same time, I really enjoy the Fairchild, and I don't really see myself changing unless something else came along. But it's in good shape and running well right now, so I guess I'm going to stay where I'm at.